The Honourable Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Dr. Nigel Clarke, opened the 2023-2024 National Budget Debate on Tuesday, and he's with us now to give us some more details on his presentation. Morning, sir. Welcome to Smile Jamaica.
Morning. Thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure, sir. Let me start with the fact that you said no new taxes.
Yes, for the sixth time consecutively.
Yeah, and I think everyone would like to hear that. But normally when you end a budget, before the 6 times, you would say, well, taxpayers going to pay for this and taxpayers going to pay for that. Yeah. So how are you going to pay for these things that taxpayers would normally pay for?
Yeah. So, that's the Jamaica I grew up in, where you'd fear the budget because every year there's going to be new taxes announced. Yeah? We have gone 6 years without announcing any new taxes. The budget is going to be financed by existing taxes. We have a bevy of existing taxes on income, on consumption and production, on international trade and so forth. And those taxes will bring in the revenue that will allow us to finance this $1 trillion budget. But we are not introducing any new taxes, nor are we increasing any new tax rates. In fact, the budget included a reduction in some taxes on importation of goats and sheep and horses and pigs. For those industries.
So some people, because I was there a couple of and said, does that mean our income tax is what's going to pay everything if we have no new taxes? Are we going to get more an increase in the amount? Is it coming from out of our pockets?
So we have many different types of taxes, right? We have 3 broad categories. The first category is what they call income and production. And that is, your personal income tax. That's the income tax that is paid by companies, which is a big source of revenue. And we also have the bauxite levy in that and other taxes related to income. Then we have the consumption and production taxes. And that consists of your GCT on domestic activity, GCT on imports. Do have a small amount of transfer tax and a number of other taxes on the consumption product. And then we have taxes on import, where duty at the wharf and other sort of travel tax when tourists come here and other, right? So there's a bevy of taxes that already exist. And in presenting a budget that says no new taxes, we're saying, look, we believe that the Jamaican population is sufficiently taxed. And we don't think that at this time it ought to be increased. And that's a deviation from our past. The reason why it's so important we make so much of it is because we've never had a 6-year period of no new net taxes. There's no historical precedent for it. Yep. And the Jamaica that I grew up in, as I mentioned before, and that you grew up in, was one that every single year without fail, because of macroeconomic instability, there would be some new tax here or there. People would be lined up outside of the ministry before a budget presentation and say, please, not me. Yeah? So it's good that we have this experience to show that it is possible. Yeah. But we have to run our affairs in a particular way to make that a reality.
Dr. Clarke, I read that it's the first time we've got a $1 trillion budget.
Yes.
Why? What makes it a $1 trillion this time?
Well, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion, yep. Right? We have been edging closer to that over the last few years, 800 billion, 900 billion, $1 trillion. There is growth in the economy that accounts for a lot of that. And there's also inflation that accounts for some of that as well. So it's a natural progression. But it puts into perspective that it's a lot of money. A lot of money, but the broad apportionment of it, we have 700 billion in non-debt expenditure. Of that $1 trillion, let's break it down for your listeners, $1 trillion. Of that $1 trillion, approximately 300 billion is for debt service. And so you can see why we're so keen that we have to get the debt down. Because imagine if we never had to pay $300 billion in debt service, what we could be doing with that money. Yep. Yeah? So after 300 billion, we have 700 billion in non-debt. Of the 700 billion in non-debt, we have approximately 625 or thereabouts for what we call recurrent expenditure. And of that amount, 367 billion for salaries and wages. So salaries and wages is the largest share of the budget, 367 billion. Debt is 300 billion. And then we have 75 billion in the budget for capital expenditure. And as I was making a point in my presentation yesterday, we have to preserve room for capital expenditure, because that is the only part of the budget where we're investing in the future, where we are improving standards of living by changing the conditions on the ground. Buses, garbage trucks, schools, hospitals, police stations, water, sewage, yeah? And, infrastructure works, roads, highways, and so forth. And what has happened in the past is that other expenditure has squeezed out capital expenditure, yeah? And there are 3 million of us in Jamaica, 1.5 million adults, and our budget has to be for everybody. And we have to leave space that we can attend to the needs of everyone. Our development requires us to spend in ways that the poor and vulnerable have access to public services. And we know that one of the challenges that we have in Jamaica is that in communities across Jamaica, access to public services is not equal. And if we want equality of opportunity, which is what we all say that we want, we have to preserve that share of the budget called capital expenditure is how we're going to drive equality of opportunity in the country.
Okay.
By increasing it over time so we can build out public services in every nook and cranny of the country.
You may or may not be able to comment because I know it's ongoing, the wage negotiations, but I heard you in terms of salaries being such a large part of the budget. Is that the challenge when it comes to the type of negotiation that's happening with the public sector, that you've worked on a budget and this is what the government is able to afford, but the teachers are saying it's not enough? How do you
okay, so this year is admittedly is an unusual year because what we're doing is a restructuring. It's not a one-size-fits-all increase. Everybody gets 5%. It's restructuring where we're trying to account for many, many years of compression. Yeah? And in a restructuring, you have a differential outcomes. People move by different levels. When that happens, as I mentioned, we have never done that before on a whole of government's basis. When that happens, you get individuals comparing with individuals. Why did I get this? Why did she get that? And groups comparing with groups. Why did they get that? Why did we get this? And it leads to dynamics of what we're seeing. What I tried to do on Tuesday was to refocus on the amounts involved. Mm-hmm. That the amount that we have on the table for teachers is more than we'd have had for the entire public sector in years gone by, in 2020, in 2019, in 2018. What we paid, the increase for the entire public sector is what we have just for the teachers today. The increase year on year over the past few years has been 10 billion, 11 billion, 8 billion, 7 billion. 1 year it was 14 billion. This year, compensation is increasing by over $100 billion. And over the 3 years, will increase by more than that. Putting it on the table for everybody to see that we're talking about huge volumes, and the increases, even in percentage terms, are larger than the last 10 years combined. In the last 10 years, we had increases of 0%, 0%, 0%, 4%, 4%, 5%, 2%, 4%, 5%, 4%. That adds to 28%. If you compound it, you get 31%. And the vast majority, not all, but the vast majority of persons the proposal is for compensation that is at that amount or more.
So, having said that, and Daly already said you might not be able to say everything, but what's the sticking point?
My understanding is that first of all, the majority of members of the JT executive have been very supportive of the package. A lot of people are supportive of the package. Unfortunately, we saw the ugly scene, and think people saw it for themselves, of partisan politics getting involved. We saw a number of opposition politicians making statements, making speeches, mobilizing persons. We saw, that was very unfortunate and ugly. That is where we're coming from.
Only to say that the PNP, they have rubbished that.
We saw with our own eyes. We heard Kern Spencer. We saw Kern Spencer. We saw Mark Golding at Porus yesterday. And we saw other known activists. Okay, so that is very unfortunate. But be that as it may, it's a free country. People can do as they want. Your question, though, I want to make sure.
The sticking point.
Right. So the sticking point, as I understand it, one of the challenges, Neville, is that though the movements in aggregate are more than we have had over the last 10 years, for certain categories, people are saying, look, they want more. The classroom teachers. Some people are upset that, principals and vice principals, master teachers, guidance counselors, and others appear to be moving by amounts more than they are. Neville, in order to create a compensation spine that creates space, we have to move the top up so other people can move as well.
We only have a minute, sir.
Sure.
You've said, I think you said that if it's not worked out by the end of the month, it can't work out again till next year.
Yeah, no. What I've said is that the amounts that we have in the budget for this year to pay teachers, the $12 billion that we are able to pay in this month, if it does not leave the consolidated fund and go to teachers this month, is not an amount that we can carry over. That does not mean that, you remember, it's an implementation over 3 years. Mm-hmm. So we have budgeted for the second year of the teacher compensation. So if we are to reach agreement, teachers will still get a massive step up in their monthly compensation. It's just that the back amounts for 2022, we could not pay those at the same time. Okay. So it's not all gloom. Okay. From November, I've just been trying to point out to everybody, because we just need information that the amounts in the budget for this year, which is the year is 22-23, which amount to $12 billion to the teachers, we could not pay those amounts next year. We could pay the higher salaries next year, which is good. Teachers would be enjoying much greater monthly amounts next year, provided we can come to an agreement. But the amounts due for 2022 would have to wait for subsequent years.
Yeah. I wish we had more time. I wanted to talk about the other industries.
There's so much more to talk about.
Yeah, but we're out of time.
The scholarships that we have for students going to UTech on low income, the scholarships for teachers to pursue STEM subjects, at MICA, the film industry, the Jamaica Screen Fund, making sanitation workers who are on contract permanent, and watchmen in the school system and assistant cooks in the school system.
We might have to
There's so much to talk about.
We might have to bring you back next week, sir.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, great to see you, sir, and thanks for coming this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Yep.
It's important. We'd love if you could come, because the public, sometimes when the presentations happen, it's important to have discussions so they understand.
Yep. I'll make myself available.
Yep.
All right.
The Honourable Minister of Finance and Public Service, Dr. Nigel Clarke.
Up next, the second edition of News in 5. Please stay with us.